So good local time to everyone. Mid-afternoon or early afternoon from the East Coast, where I am, live casting from Workbench in New York, where the Quay team is hosting me. They're at lunch. They'll join us in a minute or two, potentially, or they'll join us remotely. Cars, because today is the car event. So this is, to remind everybody, a public and recorded meeting. And it is September 15th. So this morning we start with a demo from Matthew Garrett at talking about Kubernetes distributed trusted computing in practice. So Matthew, let's get you started.
Okay, so just let me.
I'm going to make that dinging stop.
Okay, that's
Let me also go through and mute a couple of people here. Okay, go ahead.
Great. So you can see the slides?
We can see your slides, yes.
Excellent. This is significant progress. Okay, so my name's Matthew Garrett. I'm at CoreOS. I've been working on various security-related issues around distributed computing, and obviously tying this into Kubernetes is an interesting challenge, but a desirable outcome. So I'm going to just go through the concept of some of our implementation here and try to keep this relatively brief. Fundamentally, no matter how secure we make containers, if the host itself is not secure, then it doesn't matter. If we have signed containers, if we have various other mechanisms for verifying that the container is the container we expect it to be, does it came from the machine, from the source that we expect it to come from, if we then run that on a system that is not itself trustworthy, that system can tamper with the container. It can skip image validation. It can inject new content into the container, even if the container was originally trustworthy. It can even reach directly into a running container and modify the state of running applications. If we want to have faith that containers are trustworthy, that we can put our secrets in containers and deploy them to systems, we really need a mechanism for ensuring that the systems we're deploying our containers on are themselves trustworthy. This goes back to a technology that was first introduced in the early to mid-2000s. It falls into a category called trusted computing. Trusted computing has something of a bad reputation. There was a lot of mismanagement of the original presentation of its functionality, its desirableness, and it mostly came across as a mechanism for other people to control your computers and prevent you from doing what you wanted to do. Whereas in reality, that's not actually particularly straightforward. And instead, it's much more useful as a technology for imposing restrictions on your own systems. The base of trusted computing is the idea of creating a root of trust that extends all the way from the system firmware up to an arbitrarily high level of the stack. This is based on having something called a trusted platform module, or a TPM. That's a small chip on a system motherboard, which contains some registers, and each of those can hold hashes of each component of the boot process. And when you update the TPM, you don't directly change the content of those registers. You pass in a hash. So say the firmware generates a hash of the bootloader, generates a hash of the kernel. And those hashes are passed to the TPM and combined with the existing register values. And so you end up with something that is only plausible by performing exactly the same series of writes to the TPM. If you modify that sequence in any way, even if you're writing the same values, if you write them in a different order, the end state in the TPM will be different. So that means that if the TPM tells you, I have these values, then you can work out, well, the values I expected were this, so that's good, or the values I expected are not this, and so that's bad. TPM can sign those values and provide a signed copy of them to a remote system, which can then look at them, verify them, and then make policy decisions based on that. So the question is, how do we tie this into Kubernetes? So obviously, having this all just magically work out of the box is the best possible outcome. Right now, we're doing this in a slightly naive but basically functional way, just by introducing an additional admission controller that taints new nodes. Any node that joins the cluster is automatically tainted, and so as a result, the scheduler will not schedule anything on those nodes. So make the assumption that all new nodes are untrusted until proven otherwise. Things get a little less clean here in terms of the current implementation. So obviously, if a node joins the cluster and is then marked as tainted, you don't want that node to be able to remove its own taint. Because if it were untrusted, it would then be able to flag itself as trustworthy. So the admission controller actually has a blacklist of updates that can be performed by an untrusted system. And that's currently hard-coded, and I'm very interested in figuring out a better way of doing this, but we can get to that later. So things that it blocks are modifying the taint state, modifying the configuration, and modifying the policy that's associated with determining whether a system's trustworthy or not. We're then using RBAC in order to grant certain users permission to modify the TPM parameters. So the admission controller does not interfere with any requests that come from a user that has the appropriate RBAC permission. And then finally, there's a separate TPM agent that runs within the cluster, right now, typically running on the same host as Kubernetes controller. And this simply sits there watching for node creation or watching for any sort of policy modification, and then reaches out to the system that created this node, verifies that its TPM state matches the policy. And if there's a policy modification, goes through all the nodes and verifies that they still match the policy. Right now, this is being built out of the Kubernetes tree directly because it depends on a fair amount of the API. I'm looking forward to being able to build that outside the full Kubernetes tree. And then we're using third-party resources to store the policy information. So policy information is just what are acceptable TPM values, what are acceptable things that were logged into the TPM during the boot process. And so just look at those to make a reasonably well-informed decision. We're shipping known good policy values for CoreOS as part of the CoreOS build. Right now, determining what good values are for arbitrary operating systems is kind of a difficult job. And mention that. So TPM Manager has permission to remove the taint flag. The admission controller will allow it to do that. So if the attestation data matches the policy, we clear the taint flag, and then jobs will get scheduled on that node. Code is currently sitting there in GitHub. I need to rebase against 1.4. But otherwise, that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions about the work that the CoreOS team and Matthew are working on?
So, quick question, Matthew. Is there any way we can prevent the node from joining at all? I mean, can we start attacking this at the sort of like TLS cert level?
Right. So something we have actually considered is doing this at the authentication layer rather than the API layer. The problem there is that you then need basically separate tooling to obtain the node state to identify why the node isn't able to access the system. And that's having the node be able to join the cluster and then give us information about it through the Kubernetes API means that it's a lot easier to build stuff around this. I'm not absolutely married to implementing it at this level. I can certainly see why doing it at the TLS level is more appealing in certain ways. The other downside of doing it at the TLS level is if at runtime you update the policy, right now that's pretty straightforward. The CPM manager sees the policy update, goes through, checks all the nodes, and can then remove permission from a node because you've just discovered that node, a kernel that has a known vulnerability, you don't want any new jobs to be scheduled on that. Doing it at the TLS level, you instead need to invalidate all existing authentication and then ensure that nodes automatically picked up new one.
Cool.
That makes sense.
Yeah. How can we help? Where do you want people to meet you? On Slack, on email, on what, in order to have further discussions or participate?
So the biggest problem that I currently have is this bunch of hard-coded policy in the admission controller. Mm-hmm. And that's partly as a consequence of things like, as I said, we don't want it to be possible for nodes to remove the taint flag. But taint is just stored in a particular annotation on the node object. And in the API, my understanding is that there's no current level of access control that's sufficiently fine-grained to say, this user can modify this specific annotation, but no other user should be able to modify this specific entry in this specific annotation. So we've
discussed that, and just to fill in on that, that's what we call field level authorization. It's been discussed in the SIG Auth, and I think your use case mirrors a lot of other ones, such that it's definitely climbing in importance to have some concept of a more generic and flexible setting along these lines.
Yeah. With that, then we need to be able to implement this pretty much entirely just as an admission controller that automatically takes, and then just appropriate access control policy around that, and then the CPM manager as an entirely separate agent. So,
and there's another point too that I think I should point out is like nodes today have access to pretty much all cluster resources by policy, which isn't great if one of your nodes gets compromised. And so there's some other discussion going on about a more selective authorization policy that might only apply to nodes that is the other half of that story, which is locking down which secrets it can access and which config maps it can access and which pods it can access, et cetera. So you should probably join SIG Auth, I think.
That seems like a good choice.
And Clayton, your mastery of understatement is awesome. You have access to all resources, and that's not really good. That was great. All right. Any further questions for Matthew? All right. Thanks, Matthew, and thanks for continuing to give us updates on this work. Can you send a link or drop into the community meeting a link for your slides?
Will do.
Thank you. All right. So next up on our agenda was special interest groups. So I believe that Mike was going to give a quick update on SIG Cluster Ops. Do we have Mike with us? No. Am I misremembering? Does someone else think they're giving an update on SIG Cluster Ops? No, not at the moment. Okay. We have an update from SIG Autoscaling. So Sully, I see your video, which means you are here. But we don't have your mic. Hang on, let me see if I can make that work.
There we go.
Excellent.
I am now unmuted. All right. So we've kind of restarted the meetings for SIG Autoscaling. They are on Thursdays at 11:30 in the Eastern time. We are aiming for a bi-weekly schedule, except for next week when we're going to be meeting and discussing a roadmap for and future plan for metrics and monitoring collection going forward. Our other goals for 1.5 are to try to improve the horizontal pod autoscaler API somewhat to allow for scaling on arbitrary metrics, and also to push the cluster autoscaler forward as well. So we welcome some more participation from anybody who's interested in autoscaling, and look forward to seeing you there. We're also in the process of figuring out our relationship with SIG instrumentation, which is another metrics-related SIG. So that's something that we're moving towards in the future as well.
Yeah, I suspect there's going to be a lot of cross-collaboration there as you guys figure out where your boundaries and edges are, because I know you mentioned on the mailing list when SIG instrumentation was created that there was some potential overlap, and that would just need to be sorted as SIG instrumentation comes up and grows into a full-blown SIG. Anybody have questions about SIG autoscaling? All right, so I can do the update about Cluster Ops, which is mostly in the docs. They've been working on a bunch of drawings to try to supplement docs, trying to give us better visualization, as well as working to bring people together to push against docs from an operator perspective. So much like Kelsey's empathy sessions that he's talked about, where try to build this as if you've not built it before, and make our docs and our experience better. So Cluster Ops, I think, is working on a fair bit of that, and there is a request that people review a doc that is linked in the notes. All right, Aparna, are you? Yes, there you are, Aparna, but you are muted. You are not muted now. Hooray.
Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, so I just wanted to give a quick update from the community PM team. We met, I think it was last week, just to do a little bit of planning, to get started on the planning for the next release, which is 1.5. Sarah, I know you were able to, we have a couple of slides.
Oh, you want me to present them? Okay, let me find those. I think we should communicate this ahead of time next time. We've done this twice now. Oh, that's not the right one.
Yeah, so just the first thing in the slides is the timeline for 1.5, and I say that just as TJ walks in. So the timeline for 1.5, coding is supposed to start next week. I think that's correct. And the week is November 4th, and then it has the kind of major dates. I think the two important pieces that are preps to the next release are KubeCon, which is November 8th and 9th, and of course the US Thanksgiving holiday. So the main reason we met is because we found that the features repo was a good way for the community to have some sense of transparency around what are the features that are coming in 1.4. And so we'd like to continue that for 1.5, which means that we would like to get prospective 1.5 features into the features repo. Not everything is there yet. Not everything is frankly there for 1.4, but I think the majority was. And we got feedback that people really appreciated at a glance what was targeted for 1.4, and then being able to see what its status was. It was going to be alpha, beta, GA, and being able to put those issues that slide 2.
I'm losing your verbal. I don't know if that's our connection or yours.
There's someone else that closer to the mic too in the chat.
I can sit closer to the mic. Yeah.
Oh,
okay. And we're not able to see the screen.
You are not able.
No.
No, no one is able to. I don't think we have a comment that we're only seeing a partial of
Okay.
the screen.
Hang on, my screen sharing is paused. I may not have enough bandwidth here in order to give you the share.
Good. Is the audio getting any better?
The audio is getting better.
So being closer.
All right, great.
All right, hang on. Let me try sharing the screen again. It is very hard to, can you see the screen now?
Yeah.
Okay, I will not mess with it then. Dates and timeline.
Okay, yeah, so that's just the dates and timelines I think I already mentioned. So it's 7 weeks of, and there's some interrupts around KubeCon and Thanksgiving. So we want to get the features into the features repo. We can go to the next slide. As a PM group, we kind of talk through what could be a potential theme for the next release, which is on the next slide. And so we were thinking kind of a theme around moving towards no ops in Kubernetes. And some of the work that the PM group believes is targeted for 1.5 is around HA, high availability, for both open source, for open source environments, and then also adding in more around federation, completing the federation API, and bringing some of the federation features to beta. So ingress in GCP, expanding to ingress in AWS and ingress anywhere, and bringing that to beta. So we know that we're going to be working on federation and HA and some level of automated updates, automated upgrade. Particularly, I think the plan was to work on upgrading the master in place and coming up with a strategy for that. There will also be ongoing ease of adoption work, so continuing some of the work that the cluster lifecycle SIG has put in for alpha in 1.4. So getting towards kind of a no-ops-ish Kubernetes, this is one theme that we were sort of playing around with. Also, there are a bunch of engineering productivity items that the team added. So you can see them here, engineering health and etcd v3 work. So we're going to try and put all of this into the features repo and revisit, kind of what the theme should be as the repo gets populated. If you could go to the next slide. We also took a look at, by SIG, what the SIGs have proposed for the next release. And you can sort of see a little bit of that. I already talked about federation. The node team is working on container runtime, alternate container runtime or container runtime interface, and some security features as well as node spec. So I think we already have, the ones that are in green, we actually already have feature repo entries for, and those are already targeting 1.1. The ones that are in red, we believe are interested in targeting 1.5, but we don't have feature repos for. So for we don't have feature repo entry for Kube ADM or Bootkube, and so. So we're going to work with each of the SIGs to enter that information into features repo so that we can track it there, and each of the SIGs can manage the proposals and follow the process that we did in 1.4, which is it goes to the SIG leads, and the SIG leads decide, and it then makes it through the release and ultimately gets tagged for whether it makes it or not.
But all of this work gets tracked in the features repo, and there are templates for it.
That lead should be in 1.5 into the repo, and we will give an update probably mid-release cycle about what's in and what's planned.
So last time, I was going to say, last time we gave a timeline where we wanted all of the stubbed out features with a short description into the features repo. Do we have a date for that yet?
We haven't set a date.
I think it was 2 weeks into the coding cycle, but I'm not positive.
Yeah, so that would be reasonable. I don't know, TJ, if you have any thoughts on that, but that would put us at kind of end of September.
I think that's certainly not.
Okay, we think that's reasonable from TJ, but I missed anything else.
So end of September seems reasonable. And we will send an email out regarding this, but let's propose that end of September is a good end date.
Awesome. I don't know if you saw some of the comments in the chat. No-ops is a very contentious description. Can we talk about operability or improved operations or something that is not no-ops? Just
Yeah, hey, this is Bob Wise.
Oh, please go ahead, Bob.
Hi, I just wanted to expound on this a little bit. That was my comment. And I think that this is a topic that's come up every time the no-ops word gets used. And I know that this is kind of, I'll say no-ops is kind of Google slang for some things that are very good. But Kubernetes as a system is very operationally important and really needs to appeal to operations audiences. And I think the no-ops word really has, has a lot of potential, in fact, kind of offends one of the really important users and target audiences for systems like Kubernetes. So I would really just make a plea that we would use some other word. I mean, operational readiness, operational efficiency, power ops, that's good. I think that this keeps coming up, and I think it's worth some discussion about not offending a critical part of our constituency with this phrase. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you for raising that. Thanks for bringing that to our attention. It does sound like we'll need to have more discussion. We were not finalizing anything. I think we were just proposing
throwing buckets.
topic. Yeah.
If anyone wants more information about that particular point of contention generically in the community, John Allspaw wrote an amazing answer to Adrian Cockcroft calling something no-ops. And you only have to search for John Allspaw and no-ops and you'll find it. I think it's a gist on GitHub somewhere, but it was a really wonderful response of no, for reals, please stop dissing people who do important work. Ops will never go away.
And,
yeah, understand the sensitivity.
And I guess just to add to that, so within the community context, I think it's pretty clear that this is can be a contentious thing, and I'm sure we'll figure out how to avoid it. I would really encourage the folks on the call, perhaps Dave Aronchak, folks who are interested, sort of involved in external marketing, blog posts. I would really strongly encourage you to get the use of the no-ops word and sort of the outbound messaging from Google, because it has a similar effect. So, thank you.
Thanks. And David's not here, but I think he's on the chat. So. Thanks for the feedback.
No, I'm here. I heard you. I heard it loud and clear. Generally speaking, we've never had a single phrase to refer to a release. This is just kind of an internal. If you were going to collect all these features together, how might you put it under an umbrella? I think there have been some great comments, and Bob, I think you put your finger on it. We're definitely not looking to put people out of work. We're just looking to have them be able to focus on more interesting work. And I think we can do better about the language we use. Yeah,
it's just flat out a gut reaction is the problem. People don't hear the rest of the message. But
yep, nope, I totally agree.
Yep, we can happily move on. Aparna, do you need the last slide? Which
I think the only thing on the last slide is that we as a team need to decide what will be in core versus what is not in core. There is a proposal linked there. And one of the things that we are adding to the issue template in the features repo is an entry that says, where is this work targeted to land? Is it targeted to land in core or not?
Which also, I was going to say, which also ties into our new incubation process, which is important.
Okay, great. Yep, that's all I have. So as people are filling out the feature repo, which please do for 1.5 by SIG, keep in mind what repo you're targeting.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we move on to the march inexorably toward 1.4? Nope. All right, Philip, I think I saw you.
Hey guys.
Welcome, and thank you for your continued efforts.
Yes, of course. You able to hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, great. So I'm going to start out today talking about upgrade testing. I left a couple updates about it in my update emails, but I thought it might be worth digging in and talking about really what I'm talking about when I say that. So for upgrade testing, we have two types of upgrade testing we're doing. We have automated upgrade testing that runs different versions of our AD test suite against a skewed cluster. And the goal here is to test for API compatibility across version types. So when you upgrade your cluster from 1.3 to 1.4, for instance, and then run the 1.3 set of ED tests against that 1.4 cluster, all the ED tests should still pass. We shouldn't have broken something about the way one of our objects works or used to work. We also check API skew between master and nodes to make sure that that doesn't break anything. So we should be able to run the old ED tests against a new master, but nodes running at the old version as well. And lastly, we run tests against the new tests against an upgraded cluster just to make sure that the upgrade process for a cluster doesn't cause any issues.
You also have in your notes here that you're doing this both in GKE and GCE, so we should be testing the more generalized straight Kubernetes case, correct?
Yes, I'll get into that a little more later, but yes.
Okay, fantastic. I'll stop kibitzing.
And so right now we're testing versions both 1.2 to 1.4 and 1.3 to 1.4 because we're supporting the 1.2 backwards compatibility still. We also do manual upgrade testing. So with the automated testing, we're not creating objects in an old cluster, then upgrading the cluster, then continuing testing. What we're doing is just creating all the old objects or all the new objects against a running cluster just with skewed versions of what we're trying to do. The manual upgrade testing we do right now, which should be automated, but it's just not, tests that if you create objects in a cluster, then upgrade it to a new version, that those objects continue to still function well. So this doesn't have an automated suite we can just run against that's already developed, and instead is done by a doc with a manual list of steps and objects that we test and how we test them. So this doesn't have the coverage that our automated tests do because we can't test every field on every object with the manual testing to make sure it still functions properly in all the different situations and interactions between objects. It's really just an object by object analysis to make sure they individually seem to work. It's very kick the tires. And we can't run this against every beta, and we can't run this against the final cut the way we have it currently designed because it takes too much time, and we're still taking in cherry picks all the way until basically the 11th hour. So what we're doing is trying to look at the cherry picks we take in after we have declared we've done our final round of upgrade testing and make sure that by eyeballing it that they don't impact the possible upgrade of objects. And so we've uncovered a number of issues. A couple issues we've uncovered with the automated testing is introducing new features that have made old the way we used the client in the past incompatible. Specifically, there's one with kube control rolling update that we discovered with the introduction of garbage collection has an interaction we didn't account for. We also this also catches where we change an API in a manner that isn't backwards compatible, such by changing the name of a field we're using for something or something like that. We shouldn't be doing this. This would be a mistake if we end up doing it, but it does give us coverage against that. So moving on, I'll talk a bit about the state of the upgrade testing we've been doing. The state of the automated upgrade testing is it takes 7.5 hours to get a run of a full upgrade test suite. So that means if we don't restart, kick all the tests when we do a cherry pick, the worst case is 15 hours for it to, it just started an old one, so it finishes and takes 7.5 hours to finish and then picks up the cherry pick. So that means we don't have a lot of shots at getting fixes in, and we end up doing a lot of manual effort because we can't just make a change and test it quite as easily. There are ways we've gotten, we've reduced the time using our dev boxes, but it's hard to see these things turn green.
Phil, did you mean best case or worst case? Like basically get 2 shots a day?
I mean, we get about 3 runs per day, but the end-to-end latency, if your cherry pick goes in, it could take a full, it could have just started an old run. So we don't get your cherry, we don't pick it up, and then before starting the new run, so it's 15 hours later before you actually get the signal in the test that they turn green. So you'd have to manually kick them to prevent that. Does that answer your question, Michael?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, sir.
So what I think is good news is we've actually uncovered real issues with this yesterday. And I know everyone felt like the release was actually going very quiet, more quiet than we expected. And we all kind of wondering like, what are we missing? And so I feel like we are starting to close the gap on what are the things that maybe we are missing. And so I'm feeling optimistic from that perspective. But we're still, aside from the issues we have identified as being real problems, we have at least a dozen issues that are failing for unknown reasons, meaning we really don't know the severity of the issue, whether it's by an old test being flaky or not retrying when it's supposed to or something like that, or whether it's something like the issues we've uncovered where we've introduced changes in behavior to the objects, and now the client-side logic we've been using doesn't work anymore. One thing we're seeing is because we built in logic into the kube control client, such as for reaping and garbage collection, it's hard to keep a consistent testing view there. You really do need to test this queued client against the new server because there's 2 pieces to the logic lives in 2 places now. So that's the automated testing for using GKE, which we had the most infrastructure set up on that. For GCE, we had much less infrastructure available, and we realized late into the game the critical importance of doing this testing as well, and that GKE didn't cover everything we needed. So we're setting up infrastructure to do the same automated testing we're doing on GKE on GCE. There's infrastructure issues we are encountering there. We're working through them. We did some cherry picks this morning to try and address those. If they fixed everything with related to infrastructure, it's still going to be 8 hours from now before we get, maybe 6 hours, before we get a signal on that GCE test run. And then, so finally, manual upgrade testing, which has been going better than either the automated upgrade testing. Our team in Warsaw worked last night to do another round of testing on the most recent data that I cut and uncovered a number of issues that we need to look in more closely today. So I haven't talked about open issues in the milestone or open PRs that haven't been merged or flakes. And I'm not going to be concentrating on these right now. Paris has been doing a lot of the cherry picking work there and pushing back. So you should work through him and only bring me in if you really need to escalate. Okay, so what does this all mean? We talked a lot a bit about the upgrade test being in a pretty bad state. The the folks working on upgrade tests have been really overworked. They've been working really, really hard on this. I want everyone to know that. And we can't expect to keep the same pace and have the same people just plugging in long hours to get this done. It's going to result in us starting to make poor decisions and trying to cut corners. So I want to set the expectation now that I'm telling people to take the time they need to make sure they have the energy to make the right decisions. Part of that means we need to switch our mindset from trying to figure out how do we get this release out the door and change it to like what are the current issues we're encountering in the release and what are the next steps we should be taking as we discover those issues. And we just really need to focus on making sure that we're not getting tunnel vision around trying to get to an arbitrary objective and think holistically and question the assumptions we've been making so far. Okay, I think that's all I have. Are there any questions or comments?
So I have one comment just based on the some of the information in the chat. So Joe called me out for saying we do both kinds of testing, GKE and GCP, and that is simply a fact of bandwidth and skill limitations. We would love for other people to be helping do more testing on different platforms that do this sort of upgrade testing. This is not us saying that those are the only two platforms by any stretch, but we try to utilize Kubernetes.
I'm joking, Sarah, and I understand the constraints there. I think one thing that might be, again, it's the who is one question, but in terms of resources, there is the CNCF cluster, and it would be interesting, I think, at some point to think about how maybe that could be utilized as part of release testing.
And we can switch.
That's not now.
Yeah. Sure. I just want to make a quick comment about that, actually. Thanks. A good comment. I don't think the major blocker here is a constraint of compute resources. The real blocker here is getting engineers working on this stuff. If we had engineers work, like we had the compute resources 3 months ago for all this stuff to be done, nothing's changed there, but none of this stuff was done. And we are now like fighting a fire to get engineers on this. So like, I guess if we want to do AWS, like getting engineering resources there is going to really be the blocking factor, or the CNCF cluster, or wherever else we want to do this.
So I was being flip. I apologize.
Yeah, no problem, but it's a serious question.
Joe, I've never heard you be flip in your life. How dare you?
I know.
I would like to.
As soon as I type
Oh, stop! It's a perfectly valid thing, and you should keep our feet to the fire. Let me say this, though I have no budget whatsoever. If you have a cloud and your single problem is not having a credit card or VMs or something to run and manage the tests, call me immediately. I will figure out how to get you money in order to accomplish that. I think Phil is exactly right. The problem is that Google engineers know Google infrastructure, and I think we're always going to be a little bit behind when it comes to knowing AWS or Azure or DigitalOcean or all the places that we'd love Kubernetes to run. So if you have the expertise, please don't let money be the blocker. Please come and talk to me.
And Aaron Krickenberg also pointed out that AWS is running regularly in end-to-end testing and such, just not in these manual upgrade testing. So thank you, Aaron. And I think the Zach Loafman at the end of that comment is because Zach did the work. Is that correct, Aaron?
Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, I was just sort of trying to track down who it was that actually put in the effort to this. And so Z Merlin, I think, is the GitHub username, or ZML is his avatar on Slack. And it seems like since it's third, the AWS tests have been running with the rest of the submit queue. So they run at the same frequency as GCE and GKE. So this is a huge, tremendous effort. This is fantastic. But just to echo Philip's point, it seems to me as though Zach was a hero and just dove in and fixed whatever needed to be fixed for Kubuk to stop breaking for AWS. And it'd be great if we had more than just heroes actually rallying around this. But just we are getting closer to the point where if we wanted to for release 1.5, if we paid more attention to this, and maybe AWS Tests less flaky for like in comparison to GC and GKE, we could block on that as well and actually test against 3 clouds.
Yeah, which would be huge. Anyone else with questions or offers of support for for Philip?
I've got some questions.
Question, yes, Michael.
As development is winding down, there are more people, at least that I'm working with, who are able to participate. And if I missed this, please let me know. Where is the sort of work queue that people can say, oh, look, I can jump on this? Has that been posted to Kubernetes-dev?
Yeah, so there's different areas. One area that I'd probably have people is I've been creating issues for the failed upgrade tests, and I've been applying the label kind upgrade test failure, and I've posted a link to that in the doc under state of automated upgrade testing. And inside each one of those issues, I post the link to the publicly visible test grid failure that shows it happening, as well as the summary of the more detailed results of that test run.
Unowned issues we have right now. Is it here also on their own? Like, you run a dozen, 5, like just order,
Like one challenge we have right now is we have 8 deployment issues. They might all be the same cause.
Okay.
We don't know. We have a couple people looking at them. We could, if we wanted to move this forward as quickly as possible, we would have different people looking at the different deployment issues and communicating between each other.
Definitely. I think I may be aware of more people who could help who are not helping. And so I want to make sure that, they're not duplicating effort of other people and getting in the way. Because I worry now that, as people are rolling off dev, we could easily, have a coordination thing that slows us all down. So
yeah,
who is the person, the coordinator, the communicator or command person that I should send them to say, oh, I'm free now, I should go to X person to know how to help 1.4?
Excellent question. Probably myself or David Oppenheimer would be the 2 best people because we're the 2 looking at the upgrade test issues.
Can I make the suggestion that we go to David Oppenheimer?
Yeah, I think that would be my preference.
Okay, so let's say that if anyone who's got free cycles, they should approach David Oppenheimer and say, I have free cycles. And then David can say, all right, well, what are you good at? And if they're, able to jive on something without a lot of ramp up, then that's great. And if it's someone, where I know there are people on my team that would take, new hires and such, or, even old hires that would take so much ramp up, it's not worth them bagging on certain issues. And thank you, Eric Toon, I saw that. So that sounds great. I think broadcasting that, which is, their finger time, please go to David, is probably a good thing to do. And then my last question is, I think it's great that you're talking about the fact that the more fatigued people are, there's a point of diminishing returns. Do we have any estimate or idea of anticipating, are we in a situation where we're like, days, weeks, months of possibly slipping the date that we're shooting for? And what is our current target date, even if we know we're not going to make it? Those are my last 2 questions.
Yeah, okay, so I think this is something I'd like to discuss in the burn down meeting, and I'd like to have other people's input on.
Okay.
Our current target, our previous current target date was Tuesday, and with the original timeline I gave, we would be cutting the release candidate tomorrow, and we would have high confidence that there's nothing wrong with it. So clearly we're not in the state that I laid out on the roadmap for getting the Tuesday date. And right now unfortunately, we've uncovered a bunch of issues, and we don't have a good clue on the severity of those issues. We haven't even finished the setting up the infrastructure to uncover additional issues with the GCE stuff.
I really want to change the tone, though. Fortunately, we found these issues before planning the release.
Yeah,
Great.
I think
this is really, really cool. And the fact that the project is at this stage is, you know, maybe we wish we could have found them earlier, but huzzah, like this is cool, dude.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm gonna end on an uplifting note, I think. But to your point, like, I think one thing I need to do in the next with my morning is figure out like the next steps that we need to be taking and how we can parallelize that effort. I wish I had a more solid vision of exactly what needed to be done.
Okay.
But yeah, to your point, like the issues we're uncovering now are largely things we haven't been doing for previous releases, and things we could have very, very easily just launched and not uncovered. So that's good. And what else is good is that this is actually not something we have to wait till the last 2 weeks to start for our next release. So we don't have to experience this every time. So hopefully things are going to continue to get better.
So I just created a Slack or a K8s release Slack channel, since there was a suggestion that we could do some of this coordination in a Slack channel. So let's see if that is helpful.
Okay, K8s release?
K8s release.
Great.
So when people have free time, they can go there, and posting specific needs there seems like a really good choice as well.
And I don't know if David Oppenheimer's in this room. He'll probably hopefully be in the burn down, but we should make sure he's probably aware of that really Slack channel.
I will invite him right now. And I will also just mention that the K8s burn down meeting is a public meeting. You need to be part of the K8s burn down mailing list to have the invite. That's only to make sure that we have a handy way to track it. It is a meeting, though, that is specifically going through open issues as quickly and as efficiently as possible, trying to get to decisions, action items, and assignees, as well as short discussions about things like risks and rewards of slipping timelines. So saying that we're pushing that conversation there is not in any way to try to, it's to try to make sure that we have the right audience of people participating, and it being a smaller group where it's not where it's not necessary to have a larger group. All right, Philip, did you have anything more?
No, that's it. Thanks, guys.
You are most welcome, and thank you. I think there have been notes in the chat about you being a hero, and we don't want heroes, but you certainly are showing heroics, so thank you. All right, anyone else have other topics that we need to cover today in our next 7 minutes? Okay, then I'll go through some quick notices, which is docs. As we push really hard toward the 1.4 release, we need to make sure that our docs match. So please get your doc PRs in for release before Friday. That's tomorrow at noon Pacific time. And the current doc PRs are tracked in a link that is showing in the notices section. For those of you who are curious and interested about how the elders idea is coming forward and how close we are getting to having a solution and an elders proposal, I have updated the issue, which I will put a link to in here. I've updated the issue in the community Kubernetes repo with revised language that would be basically the formation language for the elders, the charter for them, so that V2 is up. Please feel free to go comment on it. I would really like to lock this down as we get 1.4 out the door and get started on 1.5. The KubeCon schedule posted this morning. For those of you who are super excited about joining us, please get signed up. There is a 20% off coupon code also here in the community meeting notices. Does anyone else have any other notices, short updates, random accolades to offer? Also, can I say thank you to the very broad community for all the work you do. Ryan Jarvison posted a link that we made it into the Octo universe with having the project having the second most reviewers, which is awesome, but I vote that we try to get to #1 next year. So getting more and more consistent review across more of the contributor base is a big goal. And then the other big thank you goes out to the community for, I don't know if all of you saw the InfoWorld article about why Kubernetes is pushing forward in the container world. And one of the reasons cited was the community. So thank you all for your efforts, your help, and your continued diligence to make this as awesome a platform as we all believe it can be. See you next week.